The Indiana Fever just lost their entire championship equation before the season even started. Aliyah Boston, the 2023 Rookie of the Year, the defensive anchor who changed games with her presence alone, the player Caitlin Clark was supposed to build history alongside, limped off the court during an unrivaled game and never came back. The diagnosis reads like a secret kept deliberately in plain sight. Right lower extremity injury. That phrase is medical code for something between a minor inconvenience and a career-altering catastrophe. No one is saying which one this is. The silence from every official channel is absolutely deafening. And the timing could not be more devastating for everyone involved. Team USA training camp starts in mere days. The WNBA season hangs in CBA negotiation limbo. The one player Indiana absolutely cannot afford to lose is now questionable for everything that matters in 2025. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why this single injury sends shockwaves far beyond one player's health report, why the unrivaled league itself might bear partial responsibility for what happened, and the one uncomfortable truth about WNBA player compensation that makes situations like this almost inevitable. This is not just an injury update. This is a story about what happens when elite athletes are forced to choose between financial survival and physical longevity. What you discover here will fundamentally change how you understand every decision these players make from this moment forward. Before the injury dropped like a bomb on the Fever fanbase, Aliyah Boston was having the best stretch of basketball in her entire professional career. Not in the WNBA, but in Unrivaled, the 3-on-3 league that has become both a showcase and a survival mechanism for players who cannot afford to sit idle during the offseason. She was averaging 19 points per game, second among all centers in the entire competition. She was pulling down nearly 10 rebounds a night. She was blocking shots at a rate of 2.1 per game, the highest in the league. She had single-handedly transformed Phantom BC from the worst defensive unit in the 2025 Unrivaled season to the second-best defense in 2026, holding opponents to just 66.5 points per game. The Defensive Player of the Year award she won was not charity. It was earned through relentless physical effort, game after game, while her body absorbed punishment that would have been completely unnecessary if the WNBA season ran longer or paid significantly better. But here is the detail that seemed insignificant at the time but now looms large over everything that followed. Boston had been nursing minor wear and tear throughout the entire Unrivaled season. Nothing that made national headlines. Nothing that triggered alarm bells among coaching staffs. Just the accumulated stress of an elite athlete who has played competitive basketball without any meaningful rest for nearly 3 consecutive years. WNBA seasons, overseas leagues, Olympic preparation, and now Unrivaled layered on top of it all. The human body has hard limits that no amount of talent or determination can override. On February 27th, during Phantom BC's final regular season game against Rose BC, those limits announced themselves with sudden, brutal clarity. Boston went down. She went to the locker room. The game continued without her. Phantom BC won. But the victory meant nothing because their best player was being evaluated by medical staff while teammates celebrated a win that now feels hollow. And then the official statement dropped, and somehow, it made everything significantly worse. The official injury report listed Boston as out for the remainder of the Unrivaled season due to a right lower extremity injury. That was the complete statement released to the public. No specifics. No timeline. No indication of whether this was a muscle strain that would heal in days or a structural problem that could sideline her for months. Right lower extremity injury covers everything from a sore calf to a torn Achilles tendon to serious ligament damage. It is clinically accurate and informationally useless at the same time. When medical teams want the public to know an injury is minor, they say so directly. They use phrases like day-to-day or minor sprain. The deliberate vagueness of this particular announcement suggests one of two uncomfortable possibilities. Either the medical team does not yet fully know the extent of the damage, or they know exactly what the damage is and are not ready to share it publicly. Neither possibility offers any comfort to fans holding their breath right now. The Fever fanbase immediately spiraled into genuine panic, and that panic was entirely justified by the circumstances. This is not just about one player missing games in a secondary league that casual fans barely follow. This is about the foundation of Indiana's entire 2025 championship strategy being thrown into uncertainty at the worst possible moment in the season calendar. Boston is not a role player for the Fever. She is the engine that makes everything else function properly. Last season, she averaged 14.4 points and 8.9 rebounds per game while providing the defensive presence that allowed Caitlin Clark to operate freely on offense. The partnership between Boston and Clark was not just productive, It was genuinely historic in every measurable way. They became the first rookie duo in WNBA history to be named All-Stars together. They pushed the Fever to their first playoff appearance since 2016. They represented the future of the franchise in human form. And now one half of that partnership might be compromised before the season even begins. But the injury itself is only part of this story. The larger question every analyst, every fan, and every player in the league is now asking out loud: should Aliyah Boston have been playing in Unrivaled at all? The answer is far more complicated than it initially appears. Unrivaled offers WNBA players something the league itself currently cannot provide: meaningful supplemental income during an off-season that otherwise forces many of them to play overseas just to make ends meet financially. The average WNBA salary hovers around $130,000 per year. That sounds comfortable until you compare it to the NBA, where the average salary exceeds $9 million annually. WNBA players are not choosing to play in Unrivaled or overseas leagues because they want additional competition. They are playing because they financially need to. The economic structure of women's basketball forces elite athletes to choose between rest and revenue, between protecting their bodies and paying their bills. Boston chose revenue. She played through the entire Unrivaled season, put her body on the line night after night, and delivered dominant performances, proving she belongs among the best players in the world. And now she is injured at the worst possible time. The cruelest irony is that the very quality making her valuable to Indiana, her relentless work ethic, her willingness to compete at full intensity regardless of stakes, might be exactly what has put her crucial season in jeopardy. But here is what makes the situation even more complicated than it already appears. The CBA negotiations between the WNBA and its players' union have been dragging on for months without resolution. The current collective bargaining agreement expired, and while both sides continue to negotiate in apparent good faith, no new deal has been announced publicly. That means the 2025 WNBA season is not yet officially confirmed to start on schedule. Players are in a state of professional limbo, uncertain about what their contracts will look like, what the salary structure will be, and when, or even if, the season will start on time. Under normal circumstances, this would be stressful enough for any professional athlete. Adding a significant injury to a franchise cornerstone player while the league's entire operational structure remains unresolved creates a perfect storm of anxiety and uncertainty that benefits absolutely no one involved. For Boston specifically, the injury timing creates a cascading series of problems that compound on each other. First, there is the immediate Unrivaled situation. She has been ruled out for the remainder of the tournament, which means she will miss the playoff games that she personally helped Phantom BC qualify for through her dominant regular season performance. Her team will now have to compete without their best defensive player and one of their most reliable offensive weapons. That is a significant loss in a 3-on-3 format where every single player matters exponentially more than in traditional 5-on-5 basketball. Phantom BC built their entire identity around Boston's imposing presence in the paint. Without her anchoring the middle, they are a fundamentally different and significantly weaker team. Second, there is the Team USA situation that creates additional pressure. Boston is on the official roster for the FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament that begins March 11th in Puerto Rico. Training camp was scheduled to start March 6th in Miami. The qualifying tournament runs through March 17th, which means if Boston is not healthy enough to participate, she will miss not only the games themselves but also the crucial preparation period that helps national team players build chemistry and cohesion. Team USA has depth, but Boston brings specific qualities, interior defense, rebounding, finishing around the rim, that are not easily replicated by simply plugging in another name from the roster. Her absence would force the coaching staff to adjust their schemes and rotations with very little preparation time. Third, and most critically for her career trajectory, there is the Indiana Fever situation. If the WNBA season does start on time, training camp will follow shortly after the Team USA qualifying tournament concludes. That gives Boston almost no recovery window between the injury, any rehabilitation required, and the beginning of what the Fever hope will be a legitimate breakthrough season. Last year, Indiana took a major step forward by making the playoffs. This year, the expectation is that they will genuinely compete for a championship. Those elevated expectations are built on the assumption that Boston and Clark will both be healthy from day one. If Boston enters the season compromised, still recovering, limited in minutes, unable to play with her full physicality, the entire Fever timeline could be thrown off dramatically. And that assumes the injury heals cleanly. Here is the reality no one wants to say out loud. Lower extremity injuries in basketball are notoriously difficult to predict. What seems minor can reveal itself to be serious after imaging and specialist evaluation. The problem is rest requires time, and time is running out. The unrivaled season that Boston dominated this year was supposed to represent a positive shift in how women's basketball operates during the traditional offseason. The league was founded to give WNBA players an alternative to playing overseas during the gap between seasons. Instead of traveling to Turkey, Russia, or China, often in leagues with less media coverage, less visibility, and occasionally less safety, players could stay in the United States, compete against other elite WNBA talent, and supplement their income without the logistical nightmares of international play. On paper, this sounds like an ideal solution to a persistent problem. In practice, it has created new complications that the Boston injury brings into sharp focus. The physical demands of Unrivaled are real and substantial. 3-on-3 basketball is not a recreational diversion. It is a high-intensity format that places enormous stress on players' bodies, particularly in the post area where Boston operates most frequently. Every possession matters more. Every minute is more taxing. The smaller court and faster pace mean more collisions, more cuts, more explosive movements without the rest intervals that 5-on-5 basketball naturally provides when the ball is on the opposite end of the floor. Players like Boston, who thrive on physicality and interior presence, are especially vulnerable because their games require them to absorb contact constantly. The cumulative toll of an unrivaled season is not dramatically different from the cumulative toll of playing overseas. It might even be worse because the intensity level is higher and the games come faster with less recovery time. But here is the uncomfortable truth that the league and its stakeholders do not want to acknowledge publicly. If the WNBA paid players what they are worth, not NBA salaries but salaries proportional to the revenue and attention the league now generates, Unrivaled would not need to exist as a financial necessity. Players would have the option to rest during the off-season. They could rehabilitate minor injuries before they become major ones. They could train for improvement rather than competing for survival. Boston being injured in an unrivaled game raises an obvious question. Was the money she earned worth the risk? That is not a question any player should have to answer. But under the current economic structure of women's basketball, every single player faces some version of it every year. The timing of this injury intersects with the CBA negotiations in a way that feels scripted for maximum dramatic irony. Players have been arguing for better salaries, better conditions, and more sustainable career structures. The league and team owners have been calculating what they can afford versus what they want to pay. And now, right in the middle of those negotiations, one of the league's most visible and valuable young players is injured because she was playing in a secondary league to make money that the primary league does not provide. If there was ever a concrete example of why the current system is broken, the Boston injury is that example. She did everything right. She worked harder than almost anyone. She competed at elite levels across multiple leagues. And now she might miss the most important stretch of basketball in her career because the financial structure forced her to put her body at unnecessary risk. The Fever are watching this unfold with no ability to intervene. They cannot control the CBA. They cannot accelerate her healing. They can only wait. To understand what Boston means to this Fever team, you have to look beyond the statistics and into the structural role she plays on both ends of the floor. Indiana's offensive system last season was built around Caitlin Clark's ability to create shots for herself and others from the perimeter. Clark led the league in assists per game as a rookie. She hit more three-pointers than any first-year player in WNBA history. She drew defensive attention at a level that opened up opportunities for everyone around her. But those opportunities only existed because defenses could not simply collapse on Clark and dare the rest of the Fever to beat them. The reason they could not do that was Aliyah Boston. Boston's presence in the paint created a two-way threat that opposing defenses had to respect. If they committed extra bodies to stop Clark on the perimeter, Boston punished them inside with post scoring and offensive rebounds. If they stayed home to defend Boston, Clark operated with more space than any point guard could reasonably ask for. The partnership was symbiotic in the truest sense. Neither player was diminished by playing alongside the other. Both were elevated by the combination. This is rare in basketball at any level. It is especially rare when both players are in their first or second professional seasons and still learning the rhythms of the game. The defensive side of the equation was equally important. Boston anchored Indiana's interior defense in ways that do not always show up in traditional statistics. She contested shots at the rim. She forced guards to alter their driving angles. She pulled down defensive rebounds that prevented second-chance opportunities for opponents. Her physical presence alone changed how teams approached the Fever. Without her on the floor, Indiana's defensive identity shifts completely. They become smaller, less imposing, more vulnerable to teams that can attack the paint with size and physicality. Replace Boston with a backup center and the Fever are a different team. Not necessarily a bad team, but a team that has to play a fundamentally different style. That style might work in the regular season when opponents have limited time to scout and game plan. It will not work in the playoffs when every possession is analyzed and every weakness is exploited repeatedly. The Fever's championship aspirations are not solely dependent on Boston, but they are significantly enhanced by her presence. Remove her from the equation and the math changes in ways that are difficult to calculate but easy to feel. There is also the intangible leadership factor that statistics cannot capture. Boston was the #1 overall pick in the 2023 draft. She came into the league with expectations that would have crushed most players. She handled those expectations with maturity and professionalism that belied her age. When Clark arrived in 2024 and brought with her a media circus that transformed the franchise overnight, Boston did not become resentful or territorial. She welcomed Clark, supported her publicly and privately, and found ways to thrive alongside her rather than competing for the spotlight. That kind of selflessness is invaluable in a locker room. It creates culture. It sets standards. It models the behavior that championship teams need from their leaders. Without Boston in the early weeks of the season, if that is what this injury cost the Fever, the team loses more than production. They lose presence. The Team USA angle adds another complex layer to this already complicated situation. The FIBA World Cup qualifying tournament is not an exhibition or a mere showcase event designed for entertainment. It is a necessary step in the process of qualifying for the World Cup itself, which is a legitimate international competition that matters deeply to the players and the national program. Team USA is expected to dominate the qualifying tournament regardless of roster composition. But Boston's potential absence creates real questions about how the team will play, who will fill her specific role, and what the coaching staff will prioritize in terms of player development and lineup experimentation during the compressed preparation window available. Under normal circumstances, a qualifying tournament would be an opportunity for Team USA to build chemistry, test different combinations, and give younger players meaningful minutes against international competition. Boston was expected to be a central part of that process. Her interior presence would have allowed the coaching staff to run a variety of defensive schemes knowing they had a reliable anchor protecting the rim. Her ability to finish around the basket would have provided a counter to teams that packed the paint and dared the Americans to shoot from outside. Her rebounding would have given second chances on offense and limited opportunities for opponents. All of those elements now have question marks hovering next to them until more information becomes available. The deeper concern for Team USA is the precedent this sets and the questions it raises about player availability heading into major international competitions. Boston is not the first WNBA player to suffer an injury during the offseason while playing in unrivaled or overseas leagues. She will not be the last. The national team program depends on WNBA players being healthy and available when international obligations arise on the calendar. But those same players are being forced to play additional basketball during the offseason because the WNBA does not pay them enough to afford 6 months of genuine rest and recovery. This is a systemic issue, not an individual failure. Boston did not make a reckless decision by playing in unrivaled. She made a financially rational decision that carried physical risk, and the risk materialized at the worst possible time on the worst possible stage. The coaching staff for Team USA will have to adjust their plans on short notice. They will likely add another player to the roster as a replacement or call up someone who was on the bubble of making the team initially. That replacement player will get an opportunity they might not have received otherwise, which is a silver lining in an otherwise frustrating situation. But the fundamental problem remains unaddressed. The best players should be available for the biggest moments in the sport. When the best players are getting injured because they cannot afford to rest their bodies, the system has failed at a basic structural level that no coaching adjustment can fix. There is also the consideration of what this means for the World Cup itself, which takes place later in 2025. If Boston's injury is serious enough to affect her WNBA season, it could also affect her availability for the World Cup roster. The tournament is in September. That seems far away on paper, but recovery from significant lower extremity injuries can take months of careful rehabilitation. Depending on what the imaging ultimately shows, Boston could be facing a timeline that stretches well into the WNBA regular season. The Caitlin Clark element of this story cannot be ignored, even though Boston's injury is the primary focus. Clark and Boston have been linked together since the moment Clark was drafted by the Fever. Their partnership was supposed to define the next era of Indiana basketball. They were the foundation upon which the franchise planned to build. Losing Boston, even temporarily, changes everything about how Clark will have to play and what expectations she will face as the undisputed centerpiece of the team. Last season, Clark benefited enormously from Boston's presence. The double teams that Clark faced were less suffocating because Boston could punish any defensive overcommitment. The spacing that Clark enjoyed was created in part by the respect that Boston commanded in the paint. The workload that Clark carried was manageable because Boston shared the responsibility of creating offense. Remove Boston from the equation and all of that changes. Clark becomes easier to game plan against. Defenses can collapse on her more aggressively. The pressure on her to carry the team offensively increases dramatically. This is not to say Clark cannot handle increased responsibility. She is one of the most talented offensive players to enter the WNBA in years. Her ability to create her own shot and her vision as a passer are elite by any standard. But even the most talented players benefit from having competent teammates around them. And Boston is far more than competent. She is an all-star caliber player who complements Clark's game almost perfectly. The Fever without Boston are still a playoff caliber team because Clark is that good. But they are not a championship caliber team without both pieces functioning together at full strength. There is also the media dimension to consider. Clark receives more attention than any WNBA player in history. That attention has been a blessing for the league in terms of visibility and revenue. It has also been a burden for Clark personally in terms of scrutiny and expectation. When things go wrong for the Fever, the spotlight will inevitably find Clark. If the team struggles early in the season because Boston is unavailable or limited, the narrative will quickly shift to questions about whether Clark can carry a team on her own. Those questions are unfair given the circumstances, but fairness has never been a feature of sports media coverage. Boston's injury puts Clark in an impossible position through no fault of her own. She will be expected to elevate her game to cover for Boston's absence while simultaneously being criticized if the team fails to meet preseason expectations. That is the reality of being the most visible player on a team with championship aspirations. Every outcome gets filtered through her performance. Every game becomes a referendum on her ability to lead. The partnership with Boston was supposed to distribute that weight across two sets of shoulders. Now Clark might have to carry it alone. The good news, if there is any, is that Clark has demonstrated the mental toughness to handle pressure. She was the most scrutinized college player in history and thrived under that attention. She transitioned to the WNBA and became an all-star in her first season despite facing defensive attention that would have derailed most rookies. She has proven she can handle whatever the sport throws at her. But handling something and thriving under it are different things. Boston being healthy would have allowed Clark to thrive. Without her, Clark will have to fight for everything. The history of WNBA players dealing with significant injuries during the offseason is long and frustrating. Before Unrivaled existed, players routinely suffered injuries while playing overseas in leagues that offered less medical support and more demanding schedules. Brittany Griner tore her knee playing in Russia years ago. Other players have dealt with stress fractures, ankle injuries, and fatigue-related issues while competing abroad in various countries. The pattern is clear and has been clear for decades. Asking players to compete year-round without adequate rest produces predictable results. Bodies break down. Careers are shortened. Championships that could have been won are lost because key players were unavailable at crucial moments. Unrivaled was supposed to be part of the solution to this problem. By keeping players in the United States and providing better medical support, the league was meant to reduce the risks associated with overseas play. But the fundamental issue remains unchanged. Players are still being asked to compete during what should be their recovery period. They are still accumulating wear and tear that compounds over time. They are still making decisions about their bodies based on financial necessity rather than physical readiness. Unrivaled did not solve the problem. It relocated the problem and gave it better production values and American audiences. The only real solution is structural change within the WNBA itself. Players need to be paid enough that playing during the off-season becomes optional rather than mandatory. They need contract guarantees that provide security. They need seasons that are long enough to generate meaningful income without requiring supplemental employment abroad. The CBA negotiations that are currently stalled are supposed to address these issues directly. But until a deal is reached, players will continue to face the same impossible choices that led to Boston's injury. There is a certain bitter irony in all of this. The WNBA is more popular than it has ever been in its history. Television ratings are up. Attendance is up. Sponsorship deals are growing rapidly. Caitlin Clark's arrival brought mainstream attention that the league has been seeking for decades. The product on the court is excellent. The athletes are world-class by any measure. The stories being told are compelling enough to attract audiences who never watched women's basketball before this era. By every measure of cultural relevance, the WNBA has arrived at the mainstream conversation. And yet the players who create that value are still being paid a fraction of what their male counterparts earn. They are still being forced to play in secondary leagues to make ends meet financially. They are still getting injured because the primary league does not take care of them adequately. Boston's injury is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a broken system. The system will continue producing these symptoms until someone with the power to change it decides to act. In the meantime, players will continue to make rational decisions that carry irrational risks. They will continue to prioritize short-term income over long-term health because the alternative is financial insecurity. And some of them will continue to get hurt at the worst possible times. The Fever are not the only team watching this situation with concern. Every WNBA franchise has players competing in Unrivaled or overseas right now. Every franchise knows that their championship hopes could evaporate overnight because of an injury that happened outside of the regular season. The entire league is vulnerable to this problem. Right now, in this exact moment, everything hangs in complete suspension. The CBA negotiation continues without public resolution or any clear timeline for completion. The WNBA season remains unconfirmed for its originally scheduled start date. Team USA training camp approaches rapidly with Boston's status uncertain and increasingly concerning to everyone involved. And the Fever are left to construct contingency plans for a season that might start without their second-best player available to take the floor with the team when it matters most. The next 72 hours will determine multiple trajectories simultaneously. Either Boston's injury will be revealed as something manageable, a strain, a sprain, something that heals with rest and does not require invasive intervention, or it will be revealed as something more serious, something structural, something that demands surgery or extended rehabilitation. The difference between those two outcomes is the difference between temporary inconvenience and absolute catastrophe for everyone involved in this situation. Fever fans are holding their breath collectively across the state and the country, not just because they care about Boston as a player and a person, but because they understand what her health means for the team's championship window. Clark is 22 years old. Boston is 23. They are both in the early stages of their prime years. The window should be wide open for years to come. But windows close faster than anyone expects in professional sports. Injuries accelerate timelines. Front office decisions alter trajectories. Players who seem locked into franchises suddenly become available through unexpected circumstances. Nothing is guaranteed in this business. The opportunity that exists right now might not exist next year or the year after that. This season matters. It matters more than any Fever season in recent memory. The pieces are in place. The talent is assembled. The fan support is unprecedented. Everything is aligned for Indiana to make a serious championship run for the first time in years. Everything except the health of one crucial player. Boston proved during Unrivaled that she is capable of performing at an elite level consistently night after night. She averaged nearly 20 points per game. She led the league in blocks. She won Defensive Player of the Year unanimously. She demonstrated that her game has evolved beyond what anyone saw during her rookie season. She is not the same player she was 2 years ago. She is better, more confident, more complete, more dominant, more ready for the biggest moments the sport can offer. And now all of that development, all of that progress, all of that proof might be rendered meaningless by a single moment in a single game. She went up for a play. She came down wrong. Her body sent a signal that something was damaged. She left the court. She did not return. That sequence has played out countless times in basketball history. Sometimes the player comes back stronger than before. Sometimes the player never returns to peak form. Sometimes what seems minor becomes major, and what seems temporary becomes permanent. There is no way to know which version will unfold until more information becomes available publicly. The waiting is its own form of torture. For Boston, who knows her body better than anyone else. For the Fever, preparing for every scenario. For Team USA, finalizing roster decisions with incomplete information. For the fans, who have invested emotionally in this partnership and now face the possibility of losing a central piece before the journey begins. Time keeps passing. Answers remain scarce. The uncertainty is unbearable. The story of Aliyah Boston's injury is not really a story about one player getting hurt in one game. It is a story about the structures that govern professional women's basketball and the impossible choices those structures force upon athletes who deserve better treatment. Boston did not get injured because she was reckless. She did not get injured because she made a bad decision. She got injured because the economic reality of the WNBA required her to keep playing when her body needed rest and recovery. That is the truth at the center of everything. The partnership between Boston and Clark was supposed to be the future of the Indiana Fever. That future is not canceled because of this injury. It is delayed, postponed, put on hold while the medical staff assesses the full extent of the damage and constructs a recovery plan. But the partnership remains real. The potential remains enormous. The championship window remains open for business. What has changed is the timeline and the margin for error. The three curiosity gaps from the beginning of this story now have their answers. You understand why this injury sends shockwaves beyond one player's health, because it exposes the fragility of a system that treats its best athletes as expendable commodities. You understand why Unrivaled might bear responsibility, because the league that was supposed to protect players has instead added another venue where they can get hurt while chasing financial security during the offseason. And you understand the uncomfortable truth about WNBA compensation, that until players are paid fairly for their labor, they will continue to face impossible choices between rest and revenue, health and financial survival. This was never just about basketball. It was about what we ask athletes to sacrifice and whether those sacrifices are worth the cost. It was about the gap between what the WNBA has become culturally and what it still fails to provide economically. It was about a young woman who did everything right and still ended up on the wrong end of a system that does not protect the people who make it valuable. Boston will recover. The timeline is unknown, but the outcome is not in doubt. She is too talented, too determined, too committed to let this injury define her career trajectory. She will be back on the court, anchoring the Fever defense, finishing at the rim, pulling down rebounds, doing all the things that make her special. The only question is when that return will happen. Until then, the Fever will adapt. Clark will carry more of the load. The coaching staff will adjust rotations. The front office will explore contingency options. The franchise will do whatever is necessary to compete while their franchise player heals. And the fans will wait. They will check every injury update obsessively. They will analyze every quote from team officials for hidden meaning. They will count the days until Boston is cleared to play, because they understand something casual observers might miss. This team, this partnership, this moment, it represents something rare in professional sports. The chance to watch greatness develop in real time. The chance to witness history being written together. The chance to be part of something bigger than any individual game or season. That chance still exists. The injury did not take it away. It just reminded everyone how fragile dreams can be, and how valuable the healthy moments truly are when they finally arrive. Boston's best basketball is still ahead of her. Indiana's best days are still coming. This is just a chapter, not the end of the story.